First two seem to be the most daunting. The first one being philosophy and history. There's a lot there, so it can seem intimidating to people. And then this one, which I think the reason both of them tend to be more intimidating, I want to see something right here, is because there's a lot of nomenclature. There's a lot of words that seem not words that we normally use. Like in the yoga philosophy, there's a lot of Sanskrit, which is a really ancient language. It's not used very much. But same thing with anatomy. There's a lot of words that are, we struggle to try to, memorize what word goes with what muscle or what word goes with what action. But I really want to stress the point that it's way better to think about concepts and then feel your way through adding the actual word to it. For example, your outside hip muscles, if you pat your outer left hip, those muscles, yes, they have anatomical names. Some of them are your tensor fasciolata and some of your gluteals and even attachments of some of your abdominal muscles. But what, as a group, they're called are your lateral stabilizers. So that's going to be the more important thing to keep in mind at this point, is to don't let the forest for the trees or the trees for the forest, however way it goes. It's mainly to get the concepts of anatomy and then start filling in the exact words. So, and as you see them over and over again, they'll become more important. And the other reason why that, not just for learning and for the fact that it's important to do the concepts, the other thing is, as a yoga teacher, is it can be kind of exclusionary. It can make people feel that they don't know something that they should know. So I think that in that regard, it can be better to say something like your front leg muscles, as opposed to saying your quadriceps, or your back leg muscle instead of saying your hamstring. There's obviously an opportunity to teach people. For example, in yoga, if I were to say, okay, everybody do Trikonasana, that could confuse a lot of people. But if I said, we're going to do triangle pose, which looks like this, and the word for it in Sanskrit is Trikonasana. That way people start to learn the words themselves. You're a teacher, you're teaching them new words, and that can be fun. That can be part of the history of all of it. And so in that case, I think it's a good idea. But, otherwise, keep it pretty simple. So do you all have any questions about anatomy that you want to posit at this point to, put out there? Because I'll just keep talking if you don't. Okay. I'm sure you already know this because if you've read my bio, whatever, I came to yoga from a background in the basic and most important principles, I think, about exercise physiology and anatomy and psychology. I think it's really interesting because I studied all of those in school, in my graduate school, and understood them and all that kind of stuff. And then when I met yoga, so to speak, and started studying that, I was amazed at how the concepts in yoga actually were so similar to exercise physiology and psychology. And I just can't help but think that in some ways they must have influenced that thought. But also it's just the idea that thoughts, truth and understanding of how our human body works, there's some basic things that transcend names like, biomechanics or exercise physiology or whatever. Yoga, with the people that first started developing the technology of yoga were looking at the human body, just observing their own self, and by observing animals and by observing other people. So it was almost like their whole life was like a microscope or a more advanced tool to get to study the human body. So the principles that they came up with just totally reflect what's going on in our body. Any questions about that? I'll just, like I said, I keep talking and I don't want to talk over anybody. So one of the main concepts of exercise physiology and our anatomy is that we are seeking homeostasis, and homeostasis means we're seeking balance of systems. And of course, we know that this is what yoga is about a lot, the balancing of opposites. Lots of times, like we say we want to sit in a position that allows us to feel a balance of steadiness and at the same time a feeling of openness. And that's what exercise physiology is about, is finding the balance of, for example, cell in your body has a membrane around it. And so that would be the steadiness, like a river has banks on it, on either side. A lake has banks around it. Even the ocean has banks around it. So that is sort of the steadiness or the security, and it's reflected in each of our cells. And then inside that membrane, there's a lot of stuff going on, of course, just like in a lake or a river or the ocean. So for life to exist, that membrane has to be permeable. Stuff has to be able to come in for nutrients to feed this cell, but also things need to go out so that the toxins are eliminated, so you don't have an imbalance of whatever carbon dioxide or different chemicals and whatnot. So we're always seeking to have that balance in both yoga and in our physiology. And that is what creates life. If we didn't have a way to take in nutrients, or if we didn't have a way to get rid of the waste products, then we wouldn't be alive very long. So yeah, that's what we're doing in yoga, is we're always looking for that balance. And the most basic idea is asana, which means the physical postures. They need to have a balance of what's called sukha. Sukha means sweet spot, and also sthira, which is strength. And that is the same idea as the river and the flow in the river. So the reason that the yoga was developed with asana in it is because, does anybody want to venture a reason why they put asana in this practice of yoga? It's because yoga developed about 4,000 years ago or earlier, 2000 BCE, or BCE. We know for sure that people were doing yoga because there's relics and whatnot. And if you've been on the platform, there was a PowerPoint that I did that shows how yoga developed. So as far back as there, people were starting to study yoga and felt like this, how to navigate life more easily with greater peace would be to meditate, to be quiet, to be still, to come to a place where they could not be worried about everything and just still their mind. And so to be able to do that, to be able to sit in one spot for a while, they realized that, here come my dogs. They realized that it would be good to move a little bit so they could sit longer. So asana basically means to sit. And really why we do all the movements that we're doing in yoga, all those different poses, all those fancy poses that you see on Instagram or wherever, they're all just basically, the real reason is to be able to sit in a meditative position for a while. So what happened is, as time went on and yoga evolved over those couple thousand years, and then into the early part of the current era, like about 800 current era, there started to be a sort of a catalog, so to speak, of different things, different physical positions to sit in that would help you feel more able to sit longer. And that book is called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And it had about 32 asanas in it. They were all like the asanas that you probably think of at the very beginning or the very end of a class. Like when I teach a class, I start out with some hip stretches, and they're all seated poses. And I usually end that way too, with just all different kinds of seated poses. And that was what yoga was until, as far as asana, until in the late 1800s. So that's just a little background on, I guess, merging yoga philosophy and anatomy, yoga anatomy. The reason we do the stuff we do with our body is to be able to be strong enough to sit and quiet our mind. Okay. So any questions about that? Anybody want to share anything about that? No questions? Okay. So someone want to talk? Okay. So one of my favorite books about yoga anatomy is this book, and it's suggested for sure for the 300-hour students. It's called Yoga Anatomy, and it's by, I don't know if you can see it or not, by Leslie Kaminoff. And I had the good fortune to be able to study with him quite a bit. He's from New York, but he came to my studio in McCall a lot. And I went there a lot and studied with him. But he's one of the first yoga teachers that really integrated what I'm talking about here, that really integrated that idea of our anatomy being really a big part of yoga philosophy. And so a lot of the work that he does is with breathing. His school is called Breath Centered Yoga. And he talks a lot about just when I'm talking about how there's a strong link between yoga anatomy and yoga philosophy. So I thought we'd go a little bit into that. This unit that we're in is called Yoga Anatomy, Subtle and Functional Anatomy. So subtle anatomy is more the kind of yogic stuff that you think about. So the early yogis really studied how we move. They really did a lot of focused energy meditation on how we work. And again, they definitely noticed that there should be a balance. Things worked out better if there's a balance. You have your autonomic nervous system has two sides. It has a parasympathetic, of course, and the sympathetic. So it has action. The sympathetic is action. If we didn't have a sympathetic nervous system, we wouldn't get stuff done. We wouldn't get up and feed our kids. We wouldn't get out of bed. We wouldn't do all that stuff. But that has to be balanced with the parasympathetic, which is that relaxation response. So he really worked with explaining how that works in our anatomy. And as I already mentioned, our body itself is always seeking homeostasis. That's why we want that balance between action and relaxation. It's needed. But he really goes back to something even a little bit more deep than all that. So the philosophy that started back again 4,000 years ago is that we are all part of this energy that's in the world. So the early people looked at the mundane, so to speak, the mundane being the things we do every day, the food we gather and put in our mouths, the air we breathe, water, sun, all these everyday things were holy, we're special, we're part of us. We were part of that, and it was part of us. And so they felt that we were all comprised. There's my dog, sorry. They were all comprised of five elements. And the five elements are earth, and then water, fire, air, which is like wind, and then something called akasha, or rarefied air. So this is kind of the spirit aspect of all this. And so we're all comprised of all those elements, and all those elements are in the world all around us, and they all have prana. And I'm sure you've heard of the word prana if you've taken a class. Prana means life force. So it's believed, the yogis believe, that it's really, really important for us to have life force moving freely and unimpeded in our body. Okay. So the goal of our asana practice and yoga practices like pranayama, breath work, and meditation, all practices are to help move prana throughout our body so that we can be healthier and so that we can also contribute to the health of other people. So they visualize or came up with the technology of the chakra system. And this is where subtle anatomy really comes into play. The chakra system is that it's believed that there's like a main center. I think of it as a river because I'm a river person, and we have a lot of rivers here in Idaho. There's a main river that's called the Sushumna down the center axis of our body, and that has many, many branches. They're called nadis that move all throughout our body, and they even have a number for it. They say there's 72,000, but who knows if that number is exactly right. I'm right. Because I want to get to Chinese medicine in just a minute. I don't want to forget. So anyway, our practices, our asana practices, and even our meditation and pranayama practices are to help that flow go from the center out into all aspects of our body. And besides the Sushumna, the main highway, there's two rivers on either side, starting up here, that one's female and one's masculine Pingala, and Ida is the feminine, and they cross like this down our spine. And at the intersection of each of at the intersection of each of those two sides are the chakras. Okay, and so that's part of what we want to bring into balance. We want to bring in the masculine and the feminine. We want to bring in enough flow that our whole body can be flowing with life force, and that we can be a entity that helps to others to also have this greater energy and this greater flow. So any questions about that? Carrie, I wonder if you being in, the pharmaceuticals and all that kind of stuff, if you have any thoughts about how pharmaceuticals affect our energy and how, I mean, there's so much that's a really deep subject, I know, because there's a lot of talk about it now, like how we can affect our physical state, obviously through chemicals and pharmaceuticals that we use, but also we can do that with different techniques such as meditation. We can and positive mantras and whatnot to help create more positive energy. Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind, can you hear me? I'm driving,
Yeah.
but I'm almost home. The thing that comes to mind for me is just the history of pharmaceuticals and the drugs that we used 50, 60 years ago, and how they were like shotgun approaches to treating people, and they hit like every receptor in your body, and so they had tons of side effects, and low doses could kill you easily and things like that. And we fine-tuned those as we've learned more about our biology and been able to figure out how to like make pharmaceuticals more specific.
Yeah.
Instead of hitting 20 different receptors, they only hit one or two. So, and the parasympathetic and the sympathetic systems are like the basic understanding of how drugs work, because many times you're trying to target one, but you end up targeting both. That's not desirable. So
that's so interesting. I'm really excited to have you in the program, because I find this all very interesting. I like to study, on a very, simple terms, how our receptors work and how drugs, but how we can access the own drugstore in our own brain, and it's just it's oversimplification, but it's pretty interesting. My daughter-in-law just finished with she's her what's it called, nurse practitioner in child psychiatry, and with a special interest in pharmaceuticals. So I haven't even been able to talk to her about it yet, but I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that's super helpful and interesting. And just to remember again what Carrie said about the fact that, this seeking balance is what it's all about. Sometimes we need to have, however it comes to us, we need to have more energy. That's how our brain was designed, or how it developed, and why we're still here as a species, is that we do have that every now and then. There's a loop, so to speak, of the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals. That's like, okay, wait, I need to be attentive to something. That's how we take care of our kids and all that kind of stuff. But then on the other hand, we need to let ourselves repair. And that's what's so great in yoga, is that we can go ahead and, can you guys hear me okay? I might wait till my husband is finished talking. But anyway, yeah. So thank you. That's all really interesting. Yeah, good. He's going to move out of the area. Anybody else have any experience in their backgrounds that would kind of illustrate this?
This is Becca, and I would just say I find it super interesting, and I worked a lot in medical social work. I'm also a counselor, and just when we think about psychiatric meds, but also just medications in general, as well as the power of the human body. And I think, probably like many people, I have some different autoimmune conditions, know a lot of people that do. For myself, I've been able to manage a lot of that with diet and keeping stress levels down. And, versus I had gotten to the point where I was on so many medications, like, what do you know what's the side effect from what? Do you know, like they were almost causing other problems. And I don't say that works for everybody. I'm not somebody that is anti-medication at all, but I do think that there's a lot of power in our bodies, and in trying to find that balance and trying to find, what do we react to? Where is there inflammation in our systems? There's just a lot of power in that. And I think, sadly, unfortunately, the society we live in and the world we live in, and I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but, processed foods, a lot of the toxins that we're probably taking in, like, I don't know that we have any idea how that's affecting us. And so sometimes I don't know that we have a choice to completely remove ourselves from that, right? Yeah. And we might treat things other ways. But to me, I just feel like that sort of whole health perspective is really, really valuable.
Yeah, thank you. And that's so true. Both of you guys have just really brought together that idea that I like to read this book, and I reread it lots of times or listen to it, to be honest. It's called Healthy Brain. And he has a saying about, yeah, sometimes you need pills, but if you can incorporate pills and skills, that can be really powerful, and the skills are, he talks a lot about being in nature, and he talks about yoga and meditation, all that. But yeah, there's all kinds of different effects of why we have the different situations that we all have. And our society certainly has necessitated that sometimes we work a little harder than maybe the yogis who lived 4,000 years ago, that didn't have, they had a lot of stressors for sure, but the stressors are lots of times they came and then they went. And so yeah, it's to have that constant feeling of being on edge isn't healthy for us. And it is something that yoga is it's just one of the best gifts of yoga. Several of you all mentioned that you found that you were in this school because you had found yoga to be helpful for you personally, and you wanted to learn more about that. And I think because we have a varied group of people that are here together at this time in this cohort that come from health sciences and other backgrounds, that I think we'll have some good talks coming up. So thank you for bringing these things into this. As I told you, I wrote a note to talk about Chinese medicine quickly. About the same time yoga was developing, Chinese medicine also was coming up with theories about how we work. And if you have ever had acupuncture, or there's a lot of other things that are similar to acupuncture, even I think Reiki to a degree, you probably know that their system has some similarities to the idea of prana. In Chinese medicine, it's called qi, but it still means the same thing, life force. And in modern study of physiology and anatomy, I was working with somebody not that long ago, about 10 years ago. I actually had him come and teach at the yoga school. He was a physical therapist, but he was way into studying more about how fascia is, they're starting to link to the Nadi system and actually the Chinese medicine systems. Because in Chinese medicine, it's meridians. In yoga, as I mentioned, are called the nadis, NADIS. So there's so much similarity, though, that now they're looking at the fascia that we all have in our body, wondering if, maybe that's something that the ancient people were tapping into, that were kind of detecting that there was something like that, because fascia is integrated all throughout our body. It's not just the covering of muscles that we once thought, but actually it's like a system, a networking system, somewhat like the meridians and especially the nadis. So it's cool to see how these things interplay with each other. And the whole idea, again, you mentioned the word holistic. That's really it, is that there's stuff that we've learned. There's new plants. There's new findings about how different chemicals can help us. But it's like that holistic approach where we can look at what we can do that will have the fewest side effects and still help us out. So I think yoga is one of the best ones to do that, just mostly because its ability to help us relax and focus, and to get out of that constant HPA loop, that HPA loop being like where we're every now and then just like, there's got to be something, there's danger. And in our ancient times, that was necessary to run from whatever, saber-toothed tigers or whatever, to run from danger. And then, they get away and they would, be able to flush it out and then move on. In our society, we just have it constantly at us, with the beeps from our phone and the this and the that. So yeah, it's fascinating to see how this ancient wisdom is so applicable to today, I think. So great. Thanks for your help there. So I guess that's a different dog than my dog, isn't it?
That's my dog. I'm sorry. I don't know how to mute myself.
That I think is really cool. I think it's fun that there's energy around us. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of the yin and the yang. By the way, yin and yang would be coming from the Chinese medicine, and that's like the Sukha, the Stira. It's like the hot is the moon. Hatha yoga is a balancing of those energies, and just the fact that that's going to help us move through life in that more balanced state of being. So, anything else on that? I'll just keep moving on. So, also during this time period, it was believed that they that we're all part of, as I said, these five elements. And as this philosophy developed a little bit further, we move up into a period of time called the Upanishads. And during that period, they start really getting a little bit more organized about everything. And the Ayurvedic period, which actually started in the Vedic period, which precedes the Upanishads. Don't worry about these times. Veda is really, really old, and Upanishads is just not quite as old. So about 1500 BCE. They came up with an idea called the Ayurvedic system, and they came up with something called doshas. And doshas are three different combinations of the five elements that we all are. So we're born with a particular dosha. I have more the air sign, and probably more of the earth. So, but I'd probably be more Vata. But it's a combination of these. And so why this is significant is that it's that we're different. Each one of us is different. Each of us is a different combination of these. You can go online and Google and take a little easy questionnaire and find out what your dosha is if you want. But basically, the most important thing is that each of us has a physiology, and physiology meaning not just our body, but the way our brain works as well. Each of us has a physiology that can be better balanced by different things. Me being a Vata, it's important for me to feel grounded, because otherwise I can feel like I'm going off on off in the wind. So some people, it's the other way. They're very grounded. They don't want to move as much. They have kind of an inertia going on. So they may do practices that will help them become more light or more willing to move around more. So the practices of our the physical things we do, as well as our pranayama and our meditation and our diet and everything, are learn about who we are. And I always thought it was funny when these different diets would come out, and it was like, oh, everybody's supposed to be whatever, everybody eats. I went through a period of time when I was in college, where bread was really important. Eat lots of bread, or whatever meat. Now, with the ketos, it's eat a lot of meat. But it's that the recognition that everybody is going to have a different set of factors to work with, and they're going to need different things. And so when we go into the yoga practices, it is really helpful for you to keep that in mind, especially if you're teaching other people, but for yourself as well, is that every practice isn't for every person, and that it's really important to look at how it's affecting your own physiology, and how your physiology, again, I don't just mean your physical body, but how your moods and thoughts are changing by the activities that you're doing. So in Chinese medicine, they have a lot of practices as far as eating that also are to contribute to that balance of health. That's why they have the yin and the yang symbol. You've probably seen that. It's kind of like a teardrop, and the one side with a black dot, and the other is a black kind of teardrop with the white in it. And the idea is to find that balance of those different energies. The physical practice that they do in Chinese medicine, usually like Tai Chi or Qigong, things that have the word Qi in it. But they're very similar to our yoga asanas. Let's see what else is. Oh
dear. Put this on mute.
Yeah, you can just put it on mute, and if you can find it, you can.
Okay, I don't know how.
I can mute you. Is this
okay? Yeah, mute me, please.
Who is that? It needs to be muted.
If you could mute it, yes, please. I don't know how.
Okay, turn mic off. There you go. How's that? She can't. Okay, good. Another thing I'd like to mention is, since we're still kind of one toe into yoga philosophy, but this relates to the subtle anatomy that I said we're going to be talking about a lot. It's believed that basically we have energy that's moving down, that's called apana energy, that connects us with the earth. Energy that's moving up, that's prana, that's energy that's moving up. We have energy that's spreading out and coming in. So we have all these different ways energy is working. And when we move into our different postures, we'll talk about that more, but you can just imagine the postures that are more grounding. And the apana energy is where we get rid of stuff. The most classic aponic posture is the power, the squat, where we're, our feet are apart and we're squatting with our hips down towards the ground, like, well, I guess like going to the bathroom outside if you want. But that, that energy balances the energy that's going up. The energy that's moving out and throughout all of our body. Balance is balanced by the energy that's moving in, and that's associated with digestion. And all of this is related to the fact that, again, we're part of this bigger dharma, so to speak, this big, powerful ball of energy. And the deities that are associated with that, you've probably already discussed this with Umberly. But again, I think it's important because this is how a lot of our own physiology works too. We have the release. This is where in our cells release the waste products that we build up over time. That's where that membrane comes in, where through the membrane, we get rid of stuff that we no longer need. So the yogis call this Shiva. That's the Shiva energy, the energy where we are eliminating, getting rid of the obstacles to our health. And then the other deity is to bring in, and that one is Brahma. That's to bring in what we need to be nurturing. And that is kind of planting that seed. And then the third is Vishnu, which is the one who nurtures the seed. And that is with different practices we do. I mean, it could be as simple as being grateful, which I use a lot of times, but also the good food we bring in and the things that we do that are contributing to our health. Like we already, Becca, you were mentioning several of them, and Carrie too, but those all relate, again, which I think is just brilliant, to their philosophy, in that, these are three important things that we need to do. We need to get rid of the toxins. We need to do things that are planting good seeds, and we need to nurture that. So all of our yoga practices, that's what they're about, is trying to bring that about. Another concept that has to do with that is, again, related to yoga philosophy. Brahma is considered the again, as I mentioned, the seed planter, but it's like the big energy, if you want to call it the big D, the big dharma. Dharma is kind of, I don't want to use the word world order, but it's just like the way things are. It's like the way life force is. And each of us are a representation of that with our own unique little dharma. And that's why I say with a little d. So we are, as I said, each of us are different just because of how, with the combination of the earth elements, it was believed, but also here we each have a different gift or a different dharma to bring to the world. And so finally, I'll get to the subtle energy we've been talking about. The subtle energy is everything I've been talking about, but more specifically, people think of it as the chakra system, which came about a little bit later. I've mentioned the Vedas as being the oldest, the Upanishads, and then we get up into more the epic period, where that's when Kimberly probably talked to you about that, all the different mythological people, deities, other deities. There's three main deities, but all the other deities, come from there. And there's hundreds, depending on what place you grew up in India, and then as it spread out to the other parts of the world. So yeah, that's kind of how this whole thing works. And who we are is necessary for each of our little dharmas is necessary for the big dharma to exist. And one of the belief that you were taught about the yamas and the niyamas, and Brahma is considered, again, that concept, that brahmacharya. You probably heard talk about that idea of moderation, of taking care of ourselves, means that we need to do that because we are important. We're that little d of the big D, and we need to practice moderation. So by that, just in our behavior, in our eating, etc. So it goes back again to that homeostasis. We need to have things that we move towards. We need exercise, but we need rest, all that kind of thing. So I just think this whole system of yoga, and especially yoga anatomy and the subtle anatomy, is pretty fascinating as it applies to what we're going to get to next, which is more functional anatomy. We've already talked a little bit about functional anatomy in that we talked about the balance of a cell within a cell, but we'll get into it a little bit more. Okay. So yeah, that autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, just understanding that that's how things work in your body, and they work that way without our doing, snapping our fingers and turning our heart on or off. There are things that we can affect with our behavior, but they're autonomic. They happen, and yoga is a good tool to help with that. Okay. All right. Any other things that anyone would like to add? I'm going to ask you guys a little bit about housekeeping because that's kind of a good note to end on. I have that next week. Okay. So the 14th, that you wanted to meet at 5:30. Is that correct? Or is that just a mismark in my book? Is this 3:30 good, or do you want to meet at 5:30?
I'm okay either way. I mean, that is Valentine's Day.
Oh, that's
I don't know if people would have stuff going on. They may or may not, but
here, I'm going to put that there. Yeah, you're right. That is Valentine's Day. Maybe, it seems like 3:30 would be better. Is that true? Or just forget it? I mean, I could be here, but if it would 3:30 or 5:30 be better? Does anybody want to pipe up there? I don't know if I can turn.
I was just going to say, for me, I could probably do either. 5:30 would probably be better for me, but I don't think that would be better for everyone because it's a Friday night and people may have dinner plans or something.
Yeah, I know. That's why I don't know.
So
I'll put it out there to the group. You guys don't have to be the great deciders. I'll just send it out. But I did have it as 5:30, and I don't know why I changed it. Next week, the 21st, we will have that will be 5:30. And I haven't said where yet because I'm deciding. There's a couple of studios. We could go back to the vault, and we're going to be there on Sunday. But I'm just going to see. But yeah, count on 5:30 to 7:30. Becca, I think you were, interested in knowing exactly the time because there's a couple of people that are coming from over in East Idaho. So yeah,
yeah, that's helpful. I'm gonna plan to drive over on Friday afternoon, so I'll be there for Friday evening.
All right, great. Any questions that you all have about any of this work? There's a lot of information, just like there was a lot of information in the course one. There's a lot of information in this one as well. So take it slow. As I mentioned at the beginning, don't feel like you need to learn every word or, all the different concepts. Just start with the basics of, I think, balancing, bringing homeostasis to our physical body, but the whole idea of conceptually too is that we're trying to have moderation and balance because we're important, and I think that's pretty cool. I had a group of students that showed up to my chair yoga class Wednesday, and they're part of the STEP program here, which is a special education program, and they had different developmental challenges that were really interesting to work with because they totally got all of this information so well just by taking their hands to their heart and feeling that I am special, and just different things we did some chanting and some breath work, and it's just really powerful stuff to keep it at this basic idea of bringing balance to everything. I'm looking down at a word that I didn't talk about yet. Now let me say this real quick. Sorry, I was going to end pretty quickly. I want to back to the center axis of bringing the flow through our whole body. And you can think of your spine. And Angela's going to talk a lot about your spine. She's a chiropractic doctor, and she's going to be really talking about how important your spine is, that center axis. But our spine developed in such a way that when we were in the womb, it was more rounded. And our spine has changed throughout, as we've evolved through different stages in life as a species. But when we came out of the womb, we had the two other curves that started to develop. One is in the back of the neck, and one is in the low back. These are called your secondary curves in your spine. So they tend to be more vulnerable to being injured and to be exploited, so to speak. And you'll hear me use the word release valve a lot. That's because it's by this author here, Leslie Kaminoff, that we tend to exploit those two curves by kind of just releasing out into them where we don't support them anymore. So the bandhas are an important concept. for you to remember. And we'll talk more about this and you can read more about it, but I wanted to make sure and get it in today. So your curve, your spine, as I said, you have this curve here and this curve here inward. So we tend to either sometimes stand like this where we're exploiting, especially if we're going into a back bend, or flinging our neck back. And so April, what I'm doing is I'm really going into a back bend and not supporting my low back at all.
Words you pronounce wrong.
Oh.
To use before
Oh,
your
wait.
brain starts shutting. Dementia is now
Wait, good. Yeah. Sorry, you guys. That was my husband doing something on the setting about dementia, I guess. Anyway, so the bandhas, the yogis thought of this so long ago, which I think is so cool. And it came in about that when the chakras were being developed. So the bandhas, just like in a river system or irrigation system, in a farm field, you need to steer the irrigation in a direction. In a river, you need to steer so things can go down the river. In irrigation, you need to steer the water. In our body, we want to steer the flow of prana. So if you put your hands on your low belly, putting your thumb on your navel, and then putting your fingers below it, that area there, I'm going to talk about that bandha first. And that bandha, if you feel that you're kind of magnetizing or pulling your navel towards your spine, you're going to feel that takes your low back out of that deep curve. So here, I'm going to put my hand on my low back, and so I'm going to feel the deep curve. I'm going to put the other hand on my front belly, and as I pull my navel back to my spine, I have elongated that curve. I've protected that secondary curve of my low back. Okay, and I'll tell you the name of it, but don't worry about remembering it. It's called the Uddiyana Bandha, which means the upward flying lock. The other bandha is here at the back of your neck. And that is the same thing. If I were to just throw my head back without any support there, I could hurt my cervical spine. I could hurt my neck. But if I slightly pull in my chin, almost like you're pulling, if you had a navel in the middle of your throat, like the navel in your belly, almost like you're pulling that back a little bit. So the curve is less exploitable. It's no longer a release valve. And that one is called the Jalandhara Bandha. So those two bandhas help to keep the flow of prana moving in our body more efficiently. And it's really important in our anatomy. And again, I actually have been studying this for a long time. Before I ever heard of yoga, I wrote an article. It was like the only article I had published in a professional journal. And it was about this very fact, because it was about the fact that in elementary school, kids were not being taught to work their transversus abdominis appropriately. They were just doing really quick sit-ups as fast as they could. And the point was that that's not going to protect your back. That's not going to make your front belly stronger. And so I talked about pulling your navel to your spine. I think that article is on the online platform. But anyway, why I'm saying this is that this is a concept that is in both exercise physiology, but it came about way earlier in yoga anatomy, in subtle anatomy back, as far as 800 BC. So we'll talk more about all those things. They're really important, and they're really, fascinating, I think, just because they've been around for so long. And it's just like our science now is just showing how relevant all this is. Okay. So I think those are all the notes that I wanted to. If you want to do a little looking up things after you get off, or just in the next week before we have our anatomy workshop, things like bandhas would be good to look up more about the nadi system. And you can start looking at the chakras too. Angela will talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk more about it as well. I'll probably be doing the Friday night session and do that. So, it's just nice to be prepared if you can do a little bit of that research before you come in. Okay. So you all don't have anything else to add at this point. I will say goodbye and turn off the recording. But if there is something that you'd like to add, that would be great as well. I think we have a good group with different perspectives and backgrounds, which makes this really nice, right?
Debbie, I would just say, this is Becca. Just thank you. I do appreciate just listening to you. It just helps to kind of connect the dots. I feel like there's so much information, and I'm just kind of,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of flooding, right? So it's the more I can kind of hear things, and I just appreciate having this format for me too is helpful, in addition to reading, watching videos. But I do appreciate that you come on and do this live.
Well, I love it. So, okay, here she goes. Hi, April. Are you on? I have to turn mic on. April, I don't know if I can get you on. I don't know. I'm not being able to get you back on. Can you send that? Can you ask me again to get you back on? If
There
not,
we go.
oh, are you ready? Can you talk?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you too. And there was a book that you brought up, Healthy Brain. Who is that by?
His name, I believe, is Sears, Dr. Sears. I'm looking around for it and I don't see it. I'll send it to you guys, okay? Because I think you would really like it. I just listened to it. There's a lot there, and it's just so I kind of turn it on and listen to pieces and then go on and let that digest and then go back.